My name is Jesse Miller, Jr., and I was a part of the movement during the period in which Dr. King moved to Chicago. I appreciate an opportunity to share with you my knowledge of past, present, and future in reference to that movement. However, I would like to say to you is that the movement that Dr. King represented began a long time ago. History records that Americans of African descent were first brought here in the year 1619. For some of us who experienced parts of that movement later on, is that we've tried to put things in perspective where there's a clear understanding of the continuation of a journey of a people who were robbed from their fatherland. And so as I share with you my knowledge with Dr. King of what he represented at the time he represented and how that fit into the whole scheme of America of African descent with the journey that we took off on as a people in 1619. There have been a lot of stories told. However, I have not heard too many stories where people put the perspective on what really happened to our people during that time. So I'd like to share with you, based on conversations I've had with other persons of black consciousness, in terms of trying to understand the journey that our people had been on. And I'll start off by saying is that I want to share with you the second 100 years. It's been said that 1619 was the first year of our presence in America. But let's go to 1719, 100 years later, where one can see that what had happened that first 100 years was that there was a total attempt at a transition to rid a people of their identity. 100 years after our initial forefathers and foremothers were brought to America, is that all new babies were born in America. There was still the traffic from Africa, but a lot of our babies were born in America. And therefore, they were conditioned by the slave masters to a particular type of mindset. Now, history revealed to us that there were two movements going on at this time. One by the slave masters and another by the slaves. History revealed to us that some slaves refused to bow under the dictates of the slave master. They found ways to communicate with other blacks from other parts of Africa here in the Americas. There are all types of stories that can be told about the underground. That is, that blacks had to submerge what they were attempting to do to maintain some sense of freedom. And so I'd like for you to understand that part of our journey, because even though the slave masters had their own language for our journey, is that we had our own language for our journey. And so I like to think of us as being on a journey as a people which has lasted now for almost 400 years. And I think that 400-year anniversary is a pivotal point, because I think that finally Americans of African descent can be free to be who they want to be. So in telling the story of Dr. King during his tenure here on earth, It's very important that we're able to put this in perspective. Based on the time that Dr. King came to the forefront, it was a very difficult period. The history was difficult, the time was difficult, and Americans of African descent was having a very difficult time in their own country. Therefore, what Dr. King did in assessing our position in America at that time brought him to the point that brought him to North Lawndale. And that is that one of the stories he told myself and others of us who worked with him is that he felt that North Lawndale in particular, where he moved when his family came north, was a community that had all the problems of black America. And Dr. King told us that he felt that if you could turn around North Lawndale, you can turn around any community in the country because it had all the problems of a community that had been devastated by the effects of slavery, by the effects of other kinds of things that people were doing in order to keep a people from becoming a people. So therefore, I'd like to share with you that part of the story. To put this in perspective, Dr. King and the movement that he represented began long before Dr. King was born. Dr. King represented a continuation of the journey that we've been on as a people. And so I'd like to say that to you because I think that's important to understand that Dr. King's movement, as it has been said to be from time, was a continuation of a movement that took place by a people who refused to accept slavery as a means of existence. And so see Dr. King in terms of a continuation of that journey that we as a people had been on since 1619. Hopefully you understand is that Dr. King and his movement to North Lawndale was a continuation of a movement that began a long time ago. And so in that respect is that his effect on North Lawndale at that time, it was various depending on who the persons were that heard him, that listened to him, that worked with him, is that there were so many issues that affected people at that time until someone like me, who was a young person just out of the military, could meet a man like Dr. King and to listen to him as he presented what he wanted to do while he was in North Lawndale. And one of the things that he told me and my friend at the time, a gentleman named Meredith Gilbert, he told us, he said that I'm not going to stay here. He said, I'm just trying to put the light on this community because of its various problems. He said, but North Lawndale is going to change because of you, Meredith Gilbert, and you, Jesse Miller. It's going to be people like you going to have to change North Lawndale. I'm just here to highlight the conditions of your community at this time. But if you can change North Lawndale, you can change any community in the Americas. I took that to heart when he said that. And as a result of that, began to listen and try to understand what it is that he wanted a person like me, a simple person from the community, that were growing up with the conditions of the community, but not really being able to put it in perspective. After being with him, working with him, I was able, I think, to put what he was talking about in perspective in terms of what we as North Lawndalians need to be doing to better our community. And at the base of that betterment is people participation. Be involved with whatever affects your life on a community level. make sure that the community stands for what you, the citizen, believe in. And so I know that a lot of people have a lot of concerns and a lot of statements in reference to Dr. King's effect, influence, and all those kind of things in Chicago and across the nation. However, the effect he had on our community was in the changing of the mindset of our young people to influence a new thinking on the part of our young people, to get us to see that we were not better than anybody, but just as good as anybody else. And so in that experience, in that learning experience, that in itself helped to continue the journey that had been started by our people or our ancestors back in 1619. And so that was very important to know, is that change the mind of a person, that person would change his or her condition. Dr. King's selection of North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago was deliberately done because of his assessment and evaluation of the type of community North Lawndale was at that time. And as I said earlier, he really felt that all the problems that affected the community were in North Lawndale, and that if he could focus on North Lawndale and come forward with a plan to alter North Lawndale, its condition for the people, and all those kind of things, you could do it anywhere in America. So therefore, he focused on a number of things. Now, let's understand, North Lawndale at the time was a part of a community in the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago was a large city in the United States of America, a large city in the state of Illinois. And so therefore, when you look at the pros and cons of North Lawndale, you could see the difference in various parts of not only Chicago, but the state of Illinois. Some were communities that were moving forward, and some were communities that were suffering. North Lawndale was suffering. The question was, what do you do about the suffering of North Lawndale? What does it stem from? What is it that you have to do to alter all the situations that were part of making it what it was at that time, which was not a community for the best interest of the local residents? And so therefore, one of Dr. King's plans was to get the community to work together, get people of color that made up North Lawndale to work together for their best interests. Now, you had crime, you had lack of jobs, you had lack of education, you had a lot of problems. And so the components that you needed to instill in North Lawndale were components of education, job training, and all sorts of things that served for the betterment of a people. And therefore, Dr. King moved through North Lawndale trying to instill in our people a sense of pride, honesty, and decency, and then controlling your own community. Now, there were other things going on in the city of Chicago, the political apparatus and all of that, whose intention wasn't just to change North Lawndale for the betterment of North Lawndalians of that time. There was the exploitation of communities like North Lawndale. And so all of those kind of things had to be addressed. And therefore, part of the political component in Chicago did not want Dr. King to do things for a group of people who were suppressed or oppressed. And therefore, one of Dr. King's challenges was to wake up the people and to see that they were just as important as anybody else. That's why individuals like myself at that time was very important to understand is that even though things was a certain way, they didn't have to stay that way. Is that you could change what was going on in North Lawndale if you take on the responsibility of citizenship. And so that was very effective in his communication with a number of North Lawndalians of that time. Now, there was opposition to that. And that's why you read stories or hear stories about some of the problems that he ran into, because some people saw what he was doing as being something that could change the condition, change the mindset of a people, and they were interested in the exploitation of those people. And that's why Dr. King's efforts were so appreciated by some of us. But let me remind you, Dr. King's movement of that time, where he was in North Lawndale, was a mere continuation of a journey that our people had been on since 1619. We'd gone through the period of hiding ourselves if we stood for righteousness. You know, if you were black conscious, so to speak, is that there were people who looked at you as if you were an enemy of sort because you felt strongly about who you were. And so those kinds of things existed at that time, and they affected a lot of decision making that a lot of our people had in terms of, is somebody watching me or listening to me or someone trying to degrade me as a result of me being me. Historically, that had happened to us, and it was still happening during the time that Dr. King lived in North Lawndale. There were many times when Dr. King spoke before large audiences that I were a part of, whether it be in church, whether it be in stadiums. I remember one incident when I was just getting familiar with things, and I was, what was it, Chicago Stadium or somewhere, Dr. King spoke. And I'd never seen so many people massed together. And when he came in the open car that he was in, I was fascinated by who was this guy that drew all this attention with people applauding and whatnot. And Dr. King spoke. And this was the first giant meeting, I'll call it, that I had attended where he spoke to us. There were a number of times after that, individually and also in smaller groups. But however, the meeting that he had, there was a lot of talk about that, and it still is shown sometime about him coming through that stadium area in an open car, and the effect he had on those of us across the city that were there in the masses as we listened to his message. So after that, there were a number of meetings. He had come to our office on the west side there a number of times where he talked with Meredith and myself, who later on I became a staff member of SCLC. Meredith Gilbert was when I came back from the military when I first met Dr. King. So, you know, there were a number of, and then there were all types of block club meetings. There were groups of people that he would talk to, and I had an occasion to be there and to listen. And then once I got so involved, I became somewhat of a point person for if he was coming, where he was coming, and make sure the community was aware that he was coming. And doing things like that, you know, that was a part of my responsibility. And so I remember those times because those were good times. I mean, it's like being reborn, so to speak, mentally reborn. As a matter of fact, there were those of us at that time that claimed Dr. King in this fashion. that Dr. King was not only a great influence for us, but he was our mental father, is that Dr. King helped put our minds in perspective about past, present, and future. And so he became not the physical father, but the mental father of so many of us. And that's what a lot of people didn't understand. Dr. King, once he became that figure in the minds of some of us, there was no turning us around because we believed in what he had taught us. He helped put our lives as a people in perspective. And we began to see the journey that we were on as a people, is that we were going to live out our physical time here on earth, but we were a part of a continuation. That's why I said earlier that Dr. King, he was a continuation of a journey of a people. And that's what we were so appreciative of and glad to be able to put in perspective, is that he was a part of where we were going as a people. And during this time, you know what I mean, he was very influential in all of that, but he didn't start the movement. He was a part of the movement, continuing from the year 1619 when it is noted that the first slave ships were brought here. The time when Dr. King, or the word came out that Dr. King had been shot and consequently killed, is that there have been a lot said about what happened at that time and what had significance and what didn't. Let me try to share with you feelings. There have been discussions about what blacks did on the south side of Chicago, what blacks did on the west side of Chicago, so on and so on and so on. Well, I can say this in reference to people. People who feel that they have something to lose do not riot. That's very significant in reference to this particular point in time, because on the west side of Chicago, there was not a whole lot of "this is ours." That situation existed big time in North Lawndale on the west side. So therefore, when the word came out that Dr. King had been shot and died a little later, blacks on the west side felt they didn't have anything to lose. They didn't own nothing. We've been fighting for ownership. We wasn't educating our children. We didn't own any businesses. And so therefore you had a different dynamics going on in the mind of people and their reaction. But I go back to my point. People who feel they have something to lose do not riot. If you follow the riots that have taken place in America, it's usually done by people who feel like, I don't have nothing to lose. I don't feel a part of. So therefore, when something devastating happened, as of what happened with Dr. King's assassination, the west side of Chicago, where he had said has the worst conditions in urban America, is that the people didn't feel they had anything to lose. And then there was the emotion involved with, you kill our king. So therefore, people talk about, well, burning, looting, and burning your businesses. They weren't ours in the first place. That was a part of while he was here. We didn't own or control nothing. So therefore, you can see the dynamics of positions that people took. Well, if you had something, yeah, you felt you could lose something. But what about those who didn't feel they had anything? So therefore, the emotional reaction tied in with his assassination, I'm not losing anything. You killed him, might well kill me. What difference does it make? And I think that was overwhelmingly one of the situations that I don't know how much discussion went on about that point, but the fact of it is, if you search out riots that have taken place in various places across the world, not just in America, people who feel they have something to lose, they don't do that. There's the answer. You asked the question of me in terms of what do I think Dr. King would say about the present. Let me reflect back on a time when early in the era of Dr. King in the South, and the South began to rise up in terms of our young people. And I remember a speech Dr. King made when he talked about the marvelous new militancy among our people. In that statement is that he saw that as people became more aware of what he was saying and how he was pursuing trying to get justice in America, is that there was a new form of militancy, he said, that was taking place. Now, he didn't have a problem with the fact of the militancy, it was just how it was carried out. He felt strongly about there were certain things that this new militancy should not participate in, which made sense at the time. In order to achieve what we're after, is that there's a direction that you have to take in order to do that. And you have to be very careful as to not to destroy yourself in moving forward. And so if the question that you ask about what would he say about today, I think in looking at some things he said back during the 60s, is that he wouldn't be pleased with a lot of the action of a lot of our people for various reasons. Is that there is too much disorder in the absence of order, too much unorganizing in the lack of organizing. And so I would think he would go back to his formula of certain attitudes you might achieve or you might want to carry out. However, don't allow whatever you're trying to address to overwhelm you. Continuing a situation means that you're able to go through this period and succeed. And so I think that he might be hardened to some degree about the fact that it appears to be too many of us who missed early training and information and understanding of who we are, where we're going, how we're going to get there. See, because a part of the movement during that period of time was for us as a people to address what are we about as a people, where we're going as a people, how we're going to get to where we're going. Those were very important questions, and I think they still stand up today in terms of his thinking. You know what I mean? Are we continuing our journey towards self-determination?
Today, we've been asked to reminisce a little bit about Reverend Martin Luther King, his impact directly on the west side of Chicago when he was here right before he went to Memphis to the garbage workers. My name is Sam Mitchell, Jr. My father, Sam Mitchell, Sr., and Edna L. Stewart, my sister, started a restaurant in 1966 on West Madison Street in a bowling alley. Humbly as it was, it became the place, and just a couple of years later, that Martin Luther King would choose to be away from home, but have a home-cooked meal at Edna's without really funds coming too much in abundance, may I say. My father and my sister didn't care. They were so proud to feed Martin Luther King and his workers, like Dorothy Tillman and a few more others that later became aldermen and went on from there. As far as what Martin Luther King Jr. ate, I could not tell you. I saw Martin Luther King twice. I looked at him, and it was good enough for me to know he was there. Our shepherd, our father in the movement, was there on the west side. He cared about us. It's always when celebrities or whoever, when they've met at O'Hare Airport, they say that you could go to the south side because they got more, better accommodations and this and that. But they say they want to go where the best food is. They don't care what side it is. They don't care about, Martin Luther King didn't care about the accommodations. He said, I want to be where the poor people are. So that starts my comments about Martin Luther King in the west side of Chicago. Madison Street, the area where he was in, a lot of tenements lined the streets, especially from, say, Albany, all the way back to Kedzie, maybe, on both sides of the streets, kitchenettes and tenements. But Martin Luther King felt at home right there. I was in college at the time at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. So when I would come in town, I tried to sneak back just to say, oh, I just came home for the weekend. But I really wanted to see what was going on. I remember washing dishes on my breaks from school. I remember when the word went out, I was home on one of those little sneak jaunts, and I was sitting there. I can remember it like it was yesterday when they said that Dr. King had been shot. The next thing I know, I was just, oh God. My sister Edna was coming out of the kitchen when they said that he had died. And I shouted to her, Edna, King died. And she collapsed on the floor. So it was important for me to mention that because a lot of things to me died right there, or say fell or collapsed as we tried to pump ourselves up or whatever, or pump the movement up or whatever. It was a time that people were talking about Malcolm X, they were talking about Dr. King. Some people subscribed to Dr. King, some subscribed to Malcolm X or whoever. Some were indifferent. Some people were afraid to really even talk to him because, oh my God, I don't want to get in trouble. Other people just adored him. But I want to say, include a little message for the young folk who feel like they have to have it right now. Easy come, easy go. But when you work hard for something, you're more apt to appreciate it, and you're more apt to continue to keep it. One of the summers I was home washing dishes. We wash dishes right over the counter in front of the customers at one little location. And I remember some construction workers coming in early that morning and saying, "Look at him. He goes to college and he's washing dishes. You know, hey boy, give me some butter on my bread here, or my rice." And I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." I was proud to serve him because when I would get low, none of them knew that I would play Martin's record, okay? And then everybody, he said, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. So I felt like whether I was washing dishes and serving, being on a committee and serving, or wherever I was serving, giving of myself, I was great. So you can't be better than great. So the young people can be great too. And whatever they do, I wish that they would learn the ethic of hard work and the fact that they are great, even no matter how much the pay is at first, as they strive to become adults in the community.
I'm Frank Franklin, retired police officer, and if I have the time, I'll bring that occupation up later on in my talk. I was invited here to speak on my interactions with Dr. King when he was here back in the 60s. I met Dr. King in 1965. Was surprised that he even knew my name because one day we were going to board buses, and I worked with him at the Project House on 3500 on Jackson Boulevard. I met him through some friends people I actually worked for with the American Friends Service Committee under Tony Henry. So we were all in the same building. Dr. King would come by and organize us. Later on in life, I found out that we were supposed to be gang bangers, gang members. And as I mentioned, I'm a retired police officer. At this time, I was a senior at Marshall High School. And we have other successful people flanking me that were students at Marshall High School, went on to do great things. Just met Attorney Byrd that left, a Marshall High School graduate over here on the west side with Dr. King. But if you listen to the newspapers and some, you think all he did was work with gang bangers and gang members on the west side. But anyway, my closest fondest memory, and I'm not bragging, it's just that you all asked me to talk about it. We were preparing to board buses to go to Marquette Park and integrate Marquette Park. That was around 67th and Kedzie, that area. And Marquette Park was a stronghold for segregation, white supremacists. They even on 71st Street there in Marquette Park, they even had a big Nazi swastika on a building. But we were getting ready to board the buses, and I walked out of the Project House over on Jackson, and Dr. King was sitting very comfortably on the front porch on the concrete banister there. And I said, "Dr. King, aren't you ready to leave?" And he said, "No, I'm not going on the, I have some other obligations. I'm not going on the trip." And he was our leader and spiritual advisor, and I was kind of looking for Dr. King because that was a scary thing for a high school senior. And I said, "Well, I really wish you could go with us, Dr. King, but I'll be all right. I've got my knife in my pocket." Dr. King looked at me, and he called me Michael, my middle name. "Now, Michael, you know that's not what we're about. We are not going to be violent." And I said, "Okay, Dr. King, I'll go put it up." And once again, I'm not bragging, I'm just talking about my reaction. I stepped inside for a few minutes, and kicked around and kind of hid my knife from him to make sure he couldn't see it, and came back out. "Okay, Dr. King, we'll see you later." But we did have a successful and uneventful integration of Marquette Park. We did it without demonstration, went out and behaved ourselves, and the neighborhood behaved themselves. Had a chance to meet, and I haven't met very many people since that march, since we integrated the park. But one was at, I remember at a fundraiser for Danny K. Davis, sponsored by Mr. Dandridge from the Hardware. And somehow we got to talking about that, and there was a judge in the audience. And she said, you know, I was on that bus also, and this was a judge about my age. So here we are. Dr. King was working with judges, attorneys like Attorney Byrd, myself, a police officer, nothing to brag on. Now, some of the other interactions we had with Dr. King, I had with Dr. King, was his In the Slums campaign. We volunteered, many of us that went to Marshall High School, hung out around the project house. We volunteered to work in this program to end the slums, and our part that we participated in was collecting urine samples from families on the west side, on East Garfield Park, South Garfield Park, and areas north of Garfield Park. We would go around the families, collect urine samples, bring them back. They were sent off, tested, and if there were any cases of lead poisoning in the children that whose urine samples we had, families were advised to get treatment and all. And really wasn't in on that part. We were doing the footwork. The day I heard that Dr. King had been assassinated on April 4th, 1968, I was crossing the quadrangle at Lincoln University, Jefferson City, Missouri. As I mentioned, he was our leader, spiritual advisor. I hadn't seen Dr. King for being away from school the last couple of years. I hadn't seen him since 1966, and was quite shocked, saddened. Took a much greater effect on me than 5 years earlier when President Kennedy was assassinated. But those were my memories of Dr. King.
I'm Robert Shaw. I am the former alderman of the 9th Ward and Cook County Commissioner of the Board of Review. I lived on the west side. Matter of fact, I grew up on the west side of Chicago. Went to school over here, Brown Grammar School, Burney Grammar School, Crane High School. And it's, I was here when Dr. King arrived over here on the west side. As a matter of fact, when Dr. King came here, we met him down in Grant Park, and he marched from Grant Park to City Hall and pinned what he called the Bill of Particulars on City Hall door. And all of this involved, some of it involved open housing and fairness and employment and all of the things that certainly contributed to the 2008 election of the first African-American president of the United States, Barack Obama. Without Dr. King, there would have been no Barack Obama, in my opinion. He set the stage for it, and the night in November of '08, many black people across this nation, particularly those of us who met Dr. King, it brought tears to our eyes to see Barack standing up there, thanking the people of America for electing him the first African-American president in our time. Many of us thought that it would never happen, but Dr. King contributed greatly to this. And without him, it wouldn't have been no Barack Obama, in my opinion.
Well, let me ask you this. Some people were afraid to bring Dr. King into their institutions. Some people didn't let him speak necessarily in their churches. Other people didn't want him around their business establishments. Why do you think that was?
Well, many of the people, and let me say this, Liberty Baptist Church, I believe A.P. Jackson was the pastor at that time, at 49th and King Drive, was one of the first that let Dr. King in, along with Clay Evans, and there was a friendship. I can't think of
Sheldon
his.
Hall.
Sheldon Hall on the west side. So this, there was, that mentality existed that in some blacks' mind that white was right and they couldn't do nothing about it and couldn't change it. But Dr. King proved that you can change it. He proved it in Alabama. He proved it across this nation. And he lost his life proving it in Memphis. But he proved it here in Chicago. Open housing. It wouldn't have, those of us who live in the suburbs, as I do today, probably would not even been in the suburbs if it had not been for Dr. King and his open housing march and concerns for African Americans being able to move and live where they wanted to live.
Well, let me ask you this, Bob. If Dr. King had a chance to address the African American community today, what do you think he might say to us? Or what would you want him to say to us?
Well, basically, I would want Dr. King to say and reiterate what he always said. You got to stand up for principle. You got to stand up for your people. You got to stand up for your right. And many of our people today are not standing up for that and won't stand up for it. When it seemed to me that many of our so-called black leaders and other people are so happy to be where they are, not that they are free, but just to be where they are, where they can fraternize and socialize with other people to the extent that they may break bread with them. They just happy, and consequently, we just we are left out in the wilderness. But I like many people who live in the suburbs today, as I said earlier, that Dr. King fought for. Today, they think they have arrived. They think they got everything that's necessary, but little do they realize they are one step from foreclosure, moving back to the city. Many of them move back to the city today. But somewhere, and I believe Dr. King was best equipped to prick the minds of our people to the extent that where he could get them to change, because there was a certain amount of embarrassment that he brought about with his elegant speeches and so forth, and truthful speeches about where we are and what we should be doing.
Thank you so much, Alderman Robert Shaw. While you may have made your mark on the south side of Chicago and in the south suburban communities in Chicago, you got your start right here on the west side.
Well, right here on the west side, let me say this. On the west side, it probably, the first African-American alderman came about because of our protest of absentee political control in the 24th Ward. The election of Alderman Ben Lewis, who later was murdered while he was alderman in 1963. But the first black state representative was brought about, Otis Collins, because of our protests and so forth. My late brother and I protest and had to move out of our houses because even some of the brothers and sisters didn't appreciate what we were doing. We had to hightail it out of the house at
So
night.
you didn't leave the West Side willingly.
No, no. Well, sometimes you get tired of fighting and you want to go. You want to go and do some other things in terms of our position was and is that the upward mobility of black people is paramount to our success in this country, and particularly in this city.
My name is Thomas Woods, and at the time that King was visiting Chicago, I was involved in Little League baseball programs with Father Millett and Richard Barnett, who still engage in the same particular activity with trying to develop young boys into young men. I had an occasion to meet Dr. King because my sister lived at 1561 South on Hamlet at the time that he was in Chicago. And we were engaged in programs that was being sponsored by Deaton Brooks, which was to provide employment culture enrichment program for the young men and young ladies living in Lawndale at that particular time in our lives, or my life. And those programs, through Robert LaFleur, who was running an employment program for the young men who were engaged in activity on 16th Street and that particular day and time between 16th and Ogden Avenue. And our projection was to try and enroll them in training program and provide employment for them. Clarence Cash was the director of the Lawndale Urban Progress Center, which was the agency that I was employed by as a coordinator for a number of programs that was being developed, working with Rosemary Love and Miss Betts and Gloria Pusley. We developed this activity that kept the young boys from who were at that time considered coming from disadvantaged families and rogues in activity that most of the parents and fathers of that particular community thought they should redirect their activity to programs that were to make them good, moral, upstanding citizens in North Lawndale at that time.
What impact, if I could ask you, do you think that Dr. King had on the lives of the people in the North Lawndale and greater West Side areas?
I think he was the kind of man that was a character-building person for those young men that came in touch with it, and he provided good moral character for them, and so he inspired them to do better by the conversation that he had with them at the meetings that those that did attended.
Lastly, if he was here today, what do you think he would say to us?
I think his comments to all of us would be that we were not good shepherds of the materials that we had to work for, in spite of the education most of us were given or had an opportunity to become involved in. I think we did not shepherd those individuals, or the system found a way to break us out or away from these young men, which gave them no direction. The direction that he was providing would have been a direction that they stayed in school and provided support for their families and honored their mothers and fathers of the particular families that they came from.
My name is Garfield Major, most known as Garfield Major, Dr. Garfield Major, and been in the minister field about 15 years, went to school for that, and been on the west side in the same location doing exterminating and janitorial service for 54 years in the same spot, same location. And been in Chicago for the information in the city of Chicago ever since that I was approximately about 19.
So you were here when Dr. King lived on the West Side, and you also were here when the riots took place during the late 1960s.
Yes, I was.
Did you have an opportunity to meet Dr. King?
Oh, I met him face to face, hand to hand, walked together, talked together, and things of that while he was here in Chicago.
Did you participate in any of the marches and demonstrations that took place?
I could not participate in the marches because I didn't like how he had the people's marching and what they had to take. I talked with him about that, and he said, "You are right. If you can't take it, don't come." But every time they have a meeting inside a place, I was there. But for going and marching and the Caucasian throwing bricks at you, hitting you side the head, and shooting at you with a gun and over your head, bullets may hit anybody. If I went, I want to take a gun with plenty of bullets in it and shoot back. I told him that.
You did not believe in the nonviolent philosophy.
No, I do not believe in nonviolence because I believe in nonviolence, but if you get violent with me, I want to get violent with you for a simple reason. Jesus said if you make one step, he'll make two.
And yet you feel that Dr. King had a very positive influence on the quality of life for all of us.
I feel that he had the quality of life better than anybody, especially the African Americans today. He knew how to get the people together. He spoke up for the African American, and better than that, he spoke up for all people, but most so is for his own people. If everybody what we elected for elected officials and the preachers and whatnot do that today, the world would be in a better shape than it's in today.
If Dr. King was here today and had a message to give us, what do you think he would say to us and what we should do?
Well, I couldn't say what he might say today, but if he was here today and the people that he had behind him and was with him, I think we would be much better off today than we was before he got assassinated.
So
But
you would say that you are somewhat, although you did not believe in the philosophy of nonviolence, you believe that an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and that's your approach to getting your rights. But you do feel that Dr. King had positive influence on the development of this country we call the United States of America.
I feel that whoever killed Dr. Martin Luther King should have been killed themselves, whoever killed him. But it wasn't just no one man. He was paid to kill him. And I could go further than that on it, but I'm not go further than that and take a step. But some of our peoples had something to do with that killing.
My name is Ricky Brown. I'm the president of the West Side Historical Society at 5820 West Chicago Avenue. My memory of Dr. Martin Luther King was when I was 12 years old. I was attending school at St. Agatha at 1417 West Kedzie Avenue. And I'll never forget when the nuns came in and told us that they needed us to come downstairs because something great was about to take place, that someone very important was coming. When we were taken downstairs, being dressed in a uniform of white shirts with the little blue ties on, we kind of resembled some little African refugees sitting on the curb waiting for this moment to happen. Basically what happened is we began to see what looked like a parade coming down the street with police cars in the front. But the strange thing about this parade, the spectators were also on the street following the parade. So by the time it made it down to where we were, we saw this man with this big smile waving to everyone that was out waiting for him to come. And that's when we found out that it was Dr. Martin Luther King. I'll never forget that evening going home. My baby sister, Lord be with her, came home and began to tell my mother, because at that time when Dr. King got out to greet the children there, he actually went over to the kids and was waving and talking to us, but he picked my baby sister up for some strange reason. And when he put her down, when we got home, my baby sister was so elated about this. She told my mother when she got home, because she didn't realize who she was, all she remembered was King. She told my mother that she had been picked up by a king, and that has always stayed with me. But what really has stayed with me over the years was April 4th, 1968. I recall my mother coming in from work, and when she came in, to go back just a little bit, we began to get phone calls, and the calls were saying to have your mother to call when she gets in. And when my mom came in, she ran in, she didn't even take off her coat, and told us to turn the television on. And at that time, when the television came on, we heard the reporter state that Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel. And it was devastating. And this was the first time my mother, having raised 11 children, went into the room and shut the door. And that's the first time I had ever heard my mother really cry. She cried and wept like a child. But when my mother emerged, she was the same strong woman that we had always known. But it was really, really something else. So over the years, my associate and I with the Westside Historical Society began to write a book, which we've been working on for over the years. It's called April 4th, 1968, The Aftermath. And they're personal stories, accounts of people of what happened that day in their lives when Dr. King was assassinated. Because the story was that we all were out there in the street, basically burning down and looting our own community, when really you had a community that was in mourning because we had lost someone who had given his life that we would be able to exist. Our tribute now that myself and Mr. Smith of the Historical Society have been working on is to build a museum here on the West Side called the Westside Historical Society Museum, which we've basically been petitioning the aldermen in the area to allow us to get the property to build this. So I have wonderful memories of Dr. King.
My name is Ronald Smith, and I'm the Vice President of the Westside Historical Society. Everything that Mr. Brown has said is kind of echoed to my feelings and my time. We both grew up in the same neighborhood. We both saw the same thing. My memory of Dr. King was, I used to live on Douglas Boulevard on the 3200 block, and they marched down Douglas Park. All of a sudden, you know, we kids, we outside, we seeing all these people coming down the park, you know, we wondering what's going on. So the crowd, I imagine at one time the crowd was kind of small, but when it got down to us, before it got to Kizzy, it turned into a real large crowd. And people were just, you know, going on, hey, Dr. King, you know. So we all stood there and watched, you know, and seen what was going on. We was young. We didn't have the full ratification of what was going on at the time, but everybody knew who Dr. King was. It was kind of like a history day to me, you know. I really felt special that day, although I was a young kid, but I thought I saw something in life that, you know, nobody else will ever see, or the people that were around me was involved in that. Just like Rick said, we're trying to make the Westside Historical Society a reality, and hopefully in the future that will happen, and the riot and all that, we'll bring all that forth in the museum.